So the question that is in front of us is, what can we do now that hasn't been tried over the last 3 generations or more to eliminate structural racism in Tompkins County? What might work? What kind of changes need to happen? What kind of structures need to be changed or developed? And why don't we just start with you, Joe, and from your perspective, where you see structural racism showing up and what we might do about it?
Well, looking at the numbers from the sheet here, matches something that I knew specifically with secure detention, and I was actually wondering what you all would think about a notion of the juvenile court system with the juvenile delinquency cases and the PINS cases, having a specialized court for those children. In other words, a Tompkins County version of a not necessarily a treatment court, although that's apropos for some of the children, but we have specialized courts for felonies, misdemeanors, family, child abuse and neglect cases, but our juvenile system's pretty, it's the same as most other counties' juvenile systems. And I wonder if, not necessarily just the children who are in placement with the Department of Social Services, with the community, but the idea of having some portion of all the children who are facing juvenile delinquency cases coming regularly to the court. Not necessarily every week. I think that's too much for kids in school, but the court system could probably do a better job at connecting with those kids if they saw them, if the judge and the staff saw them more often.
Right. That's actually something I've been talking to a lot of teachers about in the community, that if we can get the court system with the JDs and PINs involved with the school system earlier, and rather than looking into the probation diversion and utilizing that, but having a team that meets and then having the kids come in, and if it is a once-a-week check-in, it at least shows them accountability to make sure they're still doing everything they're supposed to be doing. And if we get into the schools sooner with a team, that might improve not sending them to secure detention.
That's what I meant, the team approach, and maybe, I don't know if it's feasible to do it.
Well, I was thinking about that's a great idea, and I do know that when we do use the team approach, it is often more effective than leaving people on their own or just having them assigned to one probation officer or one social worker to take care of them. And the regular check-ins are great, and I know that we do that sometimes on kind of an ad hoc basis. But I was wondering if maybe using the permanency hearings as a time to have the check-in would be a little bit better. Should I explain what the permanency hearings is? When a child is in foster care or out of their parents' home, it could be in a foster home, it could be in a detention facility, or a higher level of care, there will be check-ins with the court no less than every 6 months, at which time the Department of Social Services writes a report about how the child is doing and comes up with a plan for the child's future, and the court checks in every 6 months, and it's to make sure that kids don't languish in foster care. And right now, the permanency hearings tend to be quick. They're usually based on papers. Usually DSS and the parents will come to an agreement about the outcome. But I often wonder if maybe that wouldn't be a better time where we can delve in a little bit deeper about the specifics of each child and what each child is going through. And instead of just saying, we're going to put this child in a life skills program and our plan is a return to parent, but really find out, what each individual is doing, and maybe actually take testimony and truly have hearings, because they are designed to be hearings.
The thing is, at this point, it's either a quick, almost pro forma, yes, we agree with the plan, or a full-blown adversarial hearing. And so if you could find some in-between forum where it's maybe some testimony to establish if there's inconsistencies in the report, or just disagreements about the plan, but not as adversarial as the full-blown hearing, which is like a trial.
Or maybe even a permanency hearing, if possible, looks like this, where you do have the players at the table, including the child, if appropriate, and then there can be conversations, and you can put something on the record in the end that a conference was held and all parties agreed to this, and that way there's more of a sharing of information. And I think why the team approach works so well is because there is a sharing of information across the spectrum.
And that's what we do with neglect petitions when they're first brought in, is have a super conference now to determine what the family needs and whether or not the children need to be removed. So it would be similar to a super conference and then the follow-up appearance.
Right.
But I would think we would need to do them more often than every 6 months.
And I think I'd like to see the super conferences be more conferences and more negotiation
More
as
productive.
well. Although we try, we do it in
We
the
do.
hallways.
We do it in the room sometimes.
We stand up and go over
Read
our
as we
papers
go.
together and negotiate.
Yes.
But, it would be good to have the judge involved in that.
Yes.
Maybe.
A little more hands-on. And, this is all in the best of all worlds where the judge actually has the time to do that. So
Yes, it is.
hopefully, I think we would all try.
I think it could work. I think you could have a team approach for the juvenile justice cases, and I think that would be an improvement over the traditional.
I wanted to say that there was something called the Family Court Advisory Council some time ago. I think it was, I don't know who, or it still exists, or who's on it, or is that something that could answer some of the concerns that you just raised?
The Family Court Advisory Council? I don't know that there's been a meeting on that committee for some time, but we had started that when we brought in some of the new specialty courts. But it's something that we should bring back so that we can add this to the idea of how to eliminate the need for secure detention for a lot of these kids and out-of-home placement.
And maybe even get more of the community involved,
Yes.
just get a lot of different people who don't generally come to family court or even don't generally, work with children on a day-to-day basis, but just care, about how kids are doing and issues of institutional racism, and just get more people involved and get ideas. I think it's, this is an exciting night because I think it's an opportunity for us to talk, and nothing will ever happen if we don't all sit down and talk. So,
Do we just jump in here?
Yeah.
Well, great. I'm trying to be respectful of the format and not talk about positions or anything, but it's great to hear that you've all kind of adopted this idea that I've been pressing for months now about youth court and having other options for kids to go to. As far as supervision, one of the things we should try, what we traditionally do is have our structures of probation and DSS. One of the things we're really missing a good opportunity on is having other community members be involved with the supervision of our kids. For example, pops into my head is Travis Brooks from GIAC would be a fantastic person to refer a kid to, in addition to his probation officer or her probation officer. But hey, you know what? As a judge, I'm going to order you to go visit your probation officer, but I'm also going to order that you connect with Travis every couple weeks. And we develop those human relationships where people are actually connected to someone outside of the typical probation department structure. And there are tons of people in this community, probably many in this room, who would be more than happy to have that type of relationship with a young person. And that's where I think the real connections happen. You can develop a relationship with your probation officer, but someone like Travis or many in this room, that's teachers, that's where the real connections happen. And I think that would really support our young people in getting through the difficult times that they've been having. So I'd hope that if any of us are fortunate enough to win this election, that we'd actually carry that through and reach out to folks and make those connections happen.
Well, and we do try to use Liberty Resources, YAP, TAP, Big Brothers Big Sisters when they have availability, and we have kids in town who are able to do it. But if you live outside of the city, it's hard to get in to do the services that a lot of things are required of for the student, especially if the parents don't have transportation. And so that's been an obstacle for a lot of the kids to meet the goals, either to come home or to reduce the services they need.
The school district deals with that as well. Getting kids to places, and in fact, we're meeting with TCAT to develop a bus pass system to move our kids around. So there's a lot of opportunities, and there's always going to be difficulties. There's always going to be an excuse, a reason why something can't happen. But if a committed group get together and say there's no reason why kids can't have bus passes, we're relatively wealthy community. We have a bunch of resources and you know, connections with school board members, with administrators. We can make a lot of things happen
Right.
here.
We're in the right
And-
place for that. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And this role can expand, this county court judge role can expand to a different type of leadership. And that's what's great about having this forum here tonight.
Well, another good thing about that idea is that children coming into the system, they might see a probation officer, or even some of the organizations that work within the court system, as part of the institution. And, you know, speaking of institutional racism, so they might be more likely to connect with people that they don't perceive as part of the system that they're being confronted with. So,
You know, Joe and everyone here, can I shift the conversation a little bit? You know, we're already kind of going into implementation phase of what we want to do and plans. The title of this is about structural racism. And, you know, we can read kind of comments through the years about what that means. But for me the way I think is I like to have concrete examples. I like to kind of make it personal and know, you know, what I'm talking about as it relates to my life or your life or someone else's life. And there's a well-known example of a description of cultural and structural racism. And the example is a weightless backpack with, you know, that white people have as part of white privilege that they wear, and it has all the tools, the map, blank check, and there's you know, many people know about this example. And what I thought would be helpful tonight to actually put out on the table kind of our personal experiences with that. What's in our knapsack? How's white privilege been a benefit or a burden to us? And if we could talk about that, and since it was my brilliant idea, I guess I'll have to start. And you know, it's weird to be African American and talk about, hey, how's white privilege benefited me? But it has. Okay. You know, the first thing is I'm light-skinned, right? So in my backpack, having this lighter skin color has been a privilege, because on the spectrum of you know, color, the darker you are, the worse. So having this light skin is a privilege, right? What's my second privilege in my backpack? The second privilege is I grew up with an Irish white mother, right? Who gave me all those codes and tools. Perfect example is the standard English I can speak. I can speak non-standard English, but the standard English I can speak. I can't tell you how many times I said, mines. Hey, Mom, that's mines. She'd say, mine. Probably 1 million times. So that gift, that thing's in my backpack. You know, so that's what, you know, I want us to kind of look at ourselves and say, you know what's in my backpack? How have I benefited from this kind of structure of white privilege? And you know, it'd be great to give concrete examples of that so we can kind of really get it in a real sense.
I think the first benefit I had as someone who's a white American was the education system that I had. I went to public school 170 in Brooklyn, New York, and that's in Bay Ridge, which is although it's in Brooklyn, it's mostly, well, when I grew up, it was a mostly white, but also immigrant population, and it had a long history of being a neighborhood of immigrants, but at the same time, it was Norwegian immigrants and Irish immigrants and British people and Italian people, and I think that it's my understanding, and maybe we have to, accept certain generalizations or understandings here, is that if you have, that school probably had more resources than a school in Brooklyn where some large percentage of the children were African American. Now, so when I'm growing up as a kid, I'm not saying I have this benefit of having a public school that has all these resources and a certain tax base, et cetera. And it's a working class neighborhood, but nonetheless, I think it was an excellent school. So that's the first thing. When I was young, I thought I would, and asked this question, I would have thought there's certainly white privilege, but I would have thought of it as belonging to privileged white people. And it's taken me to, I've had to, as a young adult, realized that that's not the case, that I've had the benefit of being, not just having white privilege, but having male privilege as well, which is, I think, another, it's accepted and understood that there's male privilege. And just like, people who are racist are probably the greatest deniers of white privilege, it's people who are abusive to women who are the greatest deniers of male privilege. So beside education, I don't, it's hard to quantify, what employers hired me because I was white and spoke a certain language and had a certain basis of information that I got through my education and through my parents or whatever, through my peers. But although it's hard to quantify, it's undeniable. I was able to go to a private university and go to a law school and just think of that as a series of privileges that I've had that have been, up until, I was an adult, were invisible to me.
So I would say the biggest privilege that I think I have coming into this is I have two parents who are still married, which is probably a minority in the majority of society. And that made a difference. I had mom home until my brother went to school, and so that, I think, made a difference as well. And, going to school outside of Chicago in one of the suburbs and being bused into a much, much higher level of affluence than where I was living was a privilege. And it was interesting to watch between my senior year and my brother's freshman year, which was, we were 3 years apart, and his senior year. At my senior year, we had staff who had walkie-talkies and monitored who came and went. By his senior year, we had armed guards and metal detectors. And so even within my family, I think there was a privilege for me over Pat because it changed. It changed for the worse as time went on, and that made a difference in how we went forward.
I think everything about my life is affected by white privilege. I was born middle class, maybe even upper middle class. I grew up with a father who was a lawyer, but who also went to City College, and a mother who was a teacher. And, there were never economic worries in our life. We weren't rich. We're certainly not set for life, but there was never any kind of food insecurity, and there were always luxuries, small luxuries, but luxuries, and a chance to get away at least once a year on a family vacation, and, never any question of housing. And, I suppose in growing up as a child and a teenager, I didn't really think much about it because that was my reality and that was my world, and that's what I knew. But I've always been sort of a compassionate person, and I've always, in some sense, recognized that I'm very fortunate. But I always thought I'm fortunate because I live in America, and we have opportunities, and I'm not a child begging in the streets in a third world country, and I was always, very grateful and, counted my blessings all the time. I still like to count my blessings, but I always counted my blessings about, who I was and where I was born and how lucky I was. What I didn't know until I was an adult and I began practicing law here in Tompkins County and representing, at-risk youth and indigent adults was that there was some really bad situations right here in our country. And so while in my backpack was, every tool, I was missing the one tool of realizing that this danger that other people faced around the world were sort of right here. And what I learned further about this summer when I did attend the screenings of Race, Power of an Illusion was how this racism and this institutional racism was really created, and it was created to serve an economic purpose, and it was perpetuated to serve an economic purpose. And And I'm quite angry about that, frankly. I'm not sure what I can do. I want to be part of the conversation. I'm not sure if I have an answer tonight on how to fix it, but I certainly want to be part of fixing it, and maybe use some of my tools in the backpack to be a voice to say, I want to help. I want to change this, because I think it's horrible that what happens in our country, and is happening more and more, because the rich are getting richer, and the people who have less have even less than they ever did, and fewer opportunities, and it's harder to climb out of poverty these days. I just think it's important to be part of the conversation and part of the solution.
Well, and Joe touched on the male privilege versus female privilege. There's also the sexual orientation discrimination as well. And, I was talking to several people getting ready for this forum, and one of the things brought up, which is actually a class that they hold at Ithaca College to discuss these types of issues, was that in order to fix the system, the structural problems that we have, it can't just be race. It has to be all of the discrimination that goes on, because if we're just focusing on one of the areas of discrimination, it could create further discrimination within that area if we don't eliminate the male-female issues, the sexual orientation issues, and the financial issues. And so I think we need to hit on all of them in order to really create a system that starts to heal.
Do you think and you hear that argument a lot in terms of, and certainly they're connected, but anyone have any opinion on the specialness of race in this country or discussion? I mean, it's, we certainly have class, and we certainly have sexism and homophobia, and frankly, I think we're kind of wired that way to have our group, I'm from Ithaca versus Trumansburg. It seems to make sense to us, but in reality, just like race, it's kind of constructed. I'm from the north side, or I'm from Cayuga Heights, and it's everyone else looks at you like, oh yeah, you're from that place, Ithaca. So we're kind of hardwired to have these meaningless kind of distinctions
right.
that we support and embrace. But our sorry, I have to get closer. Our country seems to have a special situation with race, and I'd love to hear if you share that view, or is it just kind of one of the many, or I can tell by my experience, but I'd love to kind of have this conversation about it.
I absolutely share that view, but one of the things, watching the video and then doing follow-up, they mention some of the Jefferson papers, and I actually have a collection of his works that I won, and it was clear that in addition to the racism that is ingrained in how they created the hierarchy moving forward, that was their primary focus, but the secondary issue even then was that in addition to people who aren't determined to be white, which was a very limited number then, women were lesser beings as well, whether it lacked education or were seen as property as well.
Let me refocus us on race, because
Yep.
I feel like we could have a separate conversation about structural sexism, or
Oh, yeah.
structural homophobia, or structural classism, but to stay focused on strategies to eliminate structural racism. And I think, Seth, you identified the strategy that you asked of your colleagues to go around was interesting, because what I took from that was that you said that if people who want to be in positions of leadership examine their backpacks, that actually is a strategy for beginning to eliminate structural racism, for people to examine the privilege that they're carrying forward into their work. And I think that's a very powerful strategy that doesn't take a change in laws to implement that, so I want to stay focused on racism, even though we can acknowledge that other isms are important, because that's definitely the focus for tonight.
Right.
And maybe I could redirect the conversation to what strategies have you noticed in Tompkins County or elsewhere that actually work or might work to address structural racism. What have you seen as a possibility? What are some options that we might try? And don't limit yourself to the court system or the criminal justice system. What can the business community do? What can the school district do? What can an individual, what can a neighborhood do? What, so just a very,
Can I?
yeah, go right
Can I
ahead.
jump in? And I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but one of the things, and in this campaign, I've been focused on, and I've been talking about humility from the bench, and I came in here tonight with that same kind of humility and saying, I don't know what the answer to this is. I don't know how this huge problem that we all live with will be solved, but the simplest thing for me, and the only approach I've taken immediately wherever I live is involvement. I ran for the school board. I stayed on the school board through good times and bad. I got involved. I'm running for judge. I'm an attorney in the community. I coach. I'm trying to be involved and know people and be in the game so that whatever these structures are that I'm involved in are if I'm part of it, hopefully I can improve it and just have that level of involvement. And that's the only thing in thinking about this is being engaged and bringing your best to whatever situation you're in, and just that involvement, whether it's parents being involved with school, whether it's, coming out to events like this. I mean, it's just being there, and we had people yelling out from the balcony. I mean, that's involvement, and that's what makes things happen, and that was my kind of basic view on what we do here.
Can I talk about involvement?
Yeah.
My involvement as well, I'm not going to talk too much about me, is I always felt my involvement has been through my work. Because what I've been doing here in Tompkins County is, what a large part of my work has been representing children in juvenile delinquency proceedings, and as well as children who are in foster care and parents whose kids are in foster care. But I always felt a special affinity towards these kids in juvenile delinquency proceedings, because I always felt that if I was involved and I was creative about trying to get them over the issue that they're facing, that maybe their lives would be better. And it is a very one individual basis. It's one kid at a time. It's one situation at a time. But my work has informed some ideas that I do have about what our community might be able to do. And I think, Seth, when you were talking about mentoring, you were talking about Travis Brooks, and a kid can go see him. I couldn't agree more that these kids who are at risk, often coming from homes where the parents just either physically aren't there or are checked out on drugs and alcohol, or just aren't really not able to handle certain behavioral problems of the kids no matter how hard they try. We do need to connect more kids with adults, and I think that's something actually the court system can do. We need to make sure that those kids that we know their names, they're there, we have their social security numbers, we can identify them, and we can say these are the kids who need mentors. And I also liked, Anne, when you mentioned the business community, I think you mentioned the business community. I think that's a wonderful idea, because what these kids really need is a future, and nobody's going to have a future without employment. So we need to ask our business leaders to join us and say, I'm committed to taking some of these at-risk kids who are identified by the court and train them how to, work in my business, whether it's a landscaping business or farming. We have all of these organic farms in Tompkins County and the surrounding counties. Maybe some kids who've never been exposed to that need to be exposed to that. Or teach some kids, how to cook. And I don't mean how to work at McDonald's. I mean how to really cook. We have some great restaurants in town. Maybe we can get some kids into those kitchens and just more ideas like that to help individuals one by one. I don't know if we're going to dismantle structural racism without making fundamental changes of our country's economic system. And what's going on in Washington right now is poor. I heard Obama wants to cut the tax rate for corporations, and I have my hands thrown up, and I'm saying, how are we ever going to win this if if corporations are now going to have their tax rates cut. So we can only do what we can do here in our community, and it has to be on the one-by-one individual level. But I think that's possible, and I think we as lawyers, and one of us will be judge, and the rest of us will be lawyers here in Tompkins County, and we should all be committed, no matter what role we have, to making sure that creative ideas are used. All too often, I have kids, and please, Joe, I don't mean this as a criticism of you, but I do have kids who are in the social services system, and they are, placed at a place where we can find a placement, and, it's convenient, and it's, oftentimes the kids have a lot of troubles and nobody wants to take them, but we need to work harder. Those are the kids we need to think about, and we need to say, what kind of home are they coming from? What kind of backgrounds are they coming from? Who is out here in the community who wants to take them on and help? Is it, someone from the community of color? Is it someone from the business community? Is it someone from both or everywhere? And that's what we need to do.
Right, something, I hear it at the department among the caseworkers is the admonition to get creative. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Some people are more effectively creative than other people. Even within, the local government, not talking about the criminal justice system for a second as far as, possibly concrete solutions, where the department is hiring a fairly high-level person now, and the question of how do you recruit people of color to this position? There's no, it doesn't exist anymore that there are rules on the books that keep people of color out of certain jobs, and yet there's still the insidious effect of systemic racism, institutional racism, and so the question becomes, how do you get people into those positions? How do you get people to apply? And that's another place where you have to be creative. It's going to the local college. I mean, we have Cornell and Ithaca College here at TC3, and the local government has to be more aggressive about getting people into positions of leadership by doing more recruitment, or I don't know what it is. Probably more thought needs to be put in it, but it struck me that we didn't have any people of color applying for that position. I was going to ask Seth about, because you're on the school board, within the educational system, my sense is that still children in schools segregate themselves, kind of like you were talking about before. We almost have this terrible propensity to split ourselves or to see the other, when we see difference, even if it's utterly superficial. And so is there a way in high schools especially to make kids, give them some incentive to know each other better, to sit at the lunch tables together or whatever it is,
Well, look, I mean, I'm not going to, you described it as a terrible propensity to join your group. One of the most fantastic things is being in an African-American community, being with, your folks from your town. I mean, celebrating on a parade. I mean, being in Ithaca, on a parade day. I mean, that's a great shared experience. So it's not
Right.
all negative, and it's part of it. So I wouldn't want to frame the discussion in that we have to have, the quota of every kid at a table, and because it is great being black. It's fantastic to be around black people. It's fantastic to eat black food and do things that black people like to do together. So it doesn't mean that we get dispersed. It just means that we don't face the type of hurdles that are put before us in every way. And I have some examples of what this feels like, and when I try to explain to people what this structural racism feels like, it's subtle at this point. It used to be kind of in your face,
Right.
but now it's subtle. And if anyone in the audience, anyone at this table has been on a Caribbean vacation, and you turn off the resort and you go the wrong way, and you walk into a bar or a place and there's nothing but black faces, that's the norm. That shocking feeling that you had when that happened, that's the norm for African American life. It's that kind of, you're not the home team. There's statistics about how home teams do, and it's, you're not the home team, you're the other, and that's a huge psychological burden that you deal with, and how you overcome that, I don't know. But one thing I think we need to talk about in this conversation is the internalization of those negative feelings. You know, when it's coming out of a society's head into mine, whether it's news media, things like that, some of that stuff sticks. I did a little experiment, and I don't know if anyone noticed here, but I came in exactly 2 minutes late. I've been driving around since 6 o'clock. I walked in here 2 minutes late, and I wonder if some of the African American will notice, and did anyone cringe that that's the stereotype of an African American? And I hope it doesn't backfire on me, but I did that on purpose. And I wondered if, you don't have to raise your hand, but did that thought occur? Oh, the black candidate came in late. Did anybody register that? Because I did it on purpose, and I see Tommy smiling there. And the thing we struggle with is when you, as an African American, internalize all these messages you're getting. Obama talked about the car locking when he walked by. Half the time the car is locking for a legitimate reason. The woman in the elevator steps aside because she's actually trying to make space for you to come in. But in your mind, I walk in that elevator, or a young person walks in that elevator, and they're saying, uh-oh, she's stepping aside not to be polite, not to give me more room, but because she's scared of me. And that happens sometimes. I'm not denying that. I mean, we all collected signatures, and we all got doors slammed in our face. And I had to struggle and say, okay, this person's not slamming the door in their face because they're afraid of me, even though I had my protective uniform on. But it's a real thing that
Right.
You internalize these things, and we know it, even if it's not meant that way. And I'd love to hear kind of I don't have a solution for that. But
Well, when you're a white person and you lock the door, and then you notice an African American person walking by and say, "Oh God," now he thinks I just locked that door. I mean, not that it's ever happened to me, but that type of situation too. That's what I'm saying. There's so much there's a lot of hand wringing because instead of communication, and that's what I meant. When you said institutional racism is like there's a home team. In other words, someone has an advantage. They win 4 out of 7 games or whatever it is. The first step in a system is you have a system. It's just a set of rules and people acting according to them. But if you have people that everyone has, if people have biases, you can start to break those biases down by actually having more contact with people that you don't normally have contact with. So, if that's really the first step, like you were talking about, and saying, let's unload, the good stuff and the bad stuff, what is in that backpack, and assessing, what did I do in this case? We're lawyers, so did a bias sneak in there where I recommended something that I wouldn't have recommended otherwise? The first step is definitely to say, did I do that over and over again? And now I've gotten to the point where I can, I watch out for it. You have to watch out for it.
I want to just interrupt, because I think I want to focus on strategies.
Right, so I wanted to jump in with one.
If what you're describing, Seth, is the experience of young people of color in this community, what are the strategies to begin to address that, not just the internalization of the negative messages, but also the whole system of stereotypes and what could we do structurally that would begin to break that down? And you're suggesting more communication, more getting to know each other in different ways, while respecting the home team idea of really wanting to be with people that are like me. But what are some other strategies that we could use? We've been talking a lot about judicial interventions, but what about before that, before they get to that point?
I have a question, actually, a question for you, Seth, as a member of a school board. Are the school systems doing anything to connect people better and connect people better at a young age, regardless of their race? And do you see any room in the school experience that we can address racism at a very young age?
Yeah, absolutely. We continue to struggle connecting our adults to students who may or may not share their experience, whether it's race, class, whatever. Educating kids is so complicated. Just doing the delivery of the curriculum is a struggle. When we get into the nuance of making every kid feel valued in that classroom and in that school, that's at the highest level, and we're struggling and working hard every day to make that happen. 9 years into this, have I succeeded? Have I even begun to understand what's necessary? I'm getting there. Mainly, my big strategy on this is to follow Dr. Brown's lead. As an attorney, I'm not an educator, but I have an educational leader who's putting ideas forward that we can then support with votes, as far as the budget, to support our policies. So it's, I keep talking about humility, and humility is saying, you know what, I don't know it, but Dr. Brown does. Let's evaluate it, let's implement it.
And my question was really less what you personally are doing, but, as a member of the school board, you know what the school is doing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, here's just my little germ of an idea, let's make sure the kindergartners, can all get to know each other on a personal level and don't set themselves off into groups, or the first graders, the young kids. Do we do that? Do we have programs that do that?
Absolutely. We have programs where we get kids together, go on field trips together. We're putting work into this. We're definitely doing that. We have, any number of joint performances that kids come to. We share curriculum and information so that there's seamless transition from one school to the next. So yeah, we're well aware of that. And frankly, the kids are not the problem. You put kids together, in about 2 minutes, they're connected. So that's really not the problem. But yeah, we're doing joint field trips and
you said we put the kids together and they're connected, but does there come a point when they hit adolescence where they disconnect? And, is that a place where we can say, I'm noticing when they're 13, kids start to, break themselves off into groups?
No. Rob Ainsley, the board president, talks about, his experience on the state championship football team, which he reminds us of every day, that he connected with kids. He was from Enfield, and he connected with those kids from the city, and those are real bonds. So there's no age where people say, no, I'm not going to deal with you. So it's the setting you put people in, it's the tone, it's what happens at home.
Well, it sounds like that was a common experience, playing football team. I mean, nothing's better than a sports team for binding people together.
Or
pursuit
a
of
great
one goal.
teacher, who inspires you to
Or
learn. I mean, that's
a science project.
Kelly, you did theater.
Yeah.
You talk about the binding kids together, putting on a play, and that unify.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I'm going to jump in. One of the things to touch upon the education is, I think if we are starting early, and I would say, hit it at the kindergarten level, start from there, but having a change to the curriculum.
I think in Ithaca we start at the preschool level.
Excellent.
And all of the issues that you're talking about are addressed from the preschool issue, and that's one of the reasons that preschool is so important in our community, and that we need to support it, and we have supported it for a long time.
Yes, and I want to make sure that we don't lose that, because I know funding is usually an issue each year.
Actually, it's we're doing okay.
Come outside of the city. Some of the outer areas need funding for their school districts and preschool programs.
Oh, I'm only on the Ithaca Board of Education. I don't do field or anyone else. So, no, but I understand there are struggles.
And continuing that curriculum change into the grades as they increase in years, but also having constant, consistent dialogue, not just with community members, but community members having a program in the school on a regular basis so that the kids are seeing the adults having these discussions to make the change earlier, because you're right, it's ingrained. It's something we've all learned to deal with or learned to function with, that without the consistent and constant dialogue, it can't change, because you need to hear it repeatedly over time, and it may not be within our lifetime.
What's the it you need to hear?
The racism, how to change the structural racism, because it's so ingrained in the hierarchy of society, how we approach schools, how we approach colleges. When you're filling out your college application, one of the first questions is, what is your race? When you're filling out other documents, they ask what your race is, and if that's something that we're going to continue to focus on, that's part of the structural problem. It shouldn't be about your race to move forward, and if we're going to change it, there are a lot of changes on a lot of levels that we see every day that we don't think about, because you're filling out the form. If you want what they're giving you, you fill it out, you sign it, and if you don't get what they're offering. But having that consistent dialogue moving forward with community members, schools, neighborhoods, that will start changing the structure of what we're trying to stop from continuing, because it is so ingrained in everything we do.
Kelly, do you mean a dialogue explicitly about racism?
A dialogue about racism, a dialogue about how it affects the structure of everything we do on a daily basis.
So if young people heard adults talking more explicitly in more arenas about racism and about the problem of racism, that might be...
And how to change it.
And offer children more opportunities of places to talk about racism.
Yes, because if they see the adults talking about it, they're going to mimic that behavior and continue on their own with the support of the community and the adults they're seeing do this.
So the community to create those opportunities for young people and for adults to talk more explicitly.
Yes.
And have it not be covered over and have people not be able to pretend that they're colorblind.
Correct.
But you want a community that you have not only a prompt response when there's a problem, but resources devoted to it so that kids know this is something people will react to, on a consistent basis, and they can trust that.
Could you all talk at all about disproportional arrest, prosecution, and sentencing based on race?
I was just going to go there, Kirby. Disproportionality of young people being taken out of their homes, disproportionality of incarceration rates, state and local governments' disproportional involvement in the lives of people of color and poor people. And this is a structural problem, and what can be done? Well,
the one thing that Tompkins County has done is create a system of specialized courts where you have alternatives to incarceration, period, so that if the cause of the behavior, if there's a conviction and it's based on substance abuse, then you have, instead of someone going to prison, they're staying within the community, and the idea is to connect someone to the community while they're supervised, while they're getting support for substance abuse, and ideally education support or employment support, even health and mental health support if that's necessary as well.
So Joe, we've had a few of these forums, so we've talked about some of the ideas before, and one of the shortcomings of our specialty courts, our treatment courts, our drug courts, was that we structured it in a way that you were screened into treatment court. You had a committee of DSS workers, the prosecutor, and about 10 or 15 folks would get together, and they'd screen you in. You'd do a drug or alcohol eval from an evaluation place, and then they'd review that. And the conversation always seemed to deteriorate into, is that person going to be a pain? Are they going to be able to work with this person? And in some of these meetings I've attended, it's gotten to the point of this kind of subjective, will they fit in kind of thing? Do they deserve another chance? And often, especially early on a few years ago, the ideal candidate for treatment court was typically a non-minority and someone who was older. Because when they sat down with the screening folks, they spoke the right language. They didn't, a young African American might give all the clues of, oh God, I don't want to work with this kid, they're going to be a pain. And that would affect the screening process. And I know we've taken steps to kind of clear that out a little bit. But that was, when you talk about structural racism, when you
Sure.
have a structure, that kind of screening, that subjective kind of screening, it wasn't like, hey, you're struggling with addiction, come on in and toe the line and meet all the same requirements. It was a kind of, well, how do we feel about this person? And literally, we've all been in those conversations.
Right.
Yes, we have.
How do you feel about this person? Well, what does that come with?
Well, of
This
course.
person's struggling with addiction. Let them in. If they
Right.
blow it, they blow it. But this whole I like them, I don't like them
Well,
is
that's
ripe for
You can't leave it to people's biases. So I think with the end of the Rockefeller drug laws and the creation of all the new diversion programs, there's less of that because it's all more formalized now. That there's certain offers that the DA makes. What we did at DSS, something when I became the treatment court lawyer for the department, was we decided that we were going to not have any screening process at all. Every single case that has substance abuse as the factor that is causing the neglect or the abuse of the child that gets referred to treatment court, we don't settle without treatment court. And no matter what the rest of the team may say, even if they say, I've already worked with this guy, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter. And then if they go to trial, because a lot of times people don't necessarily want to be in treatment courts. No matter what, we ask the judge for that, and we go to trial every time, even when they say, I'll settle if you don't put me into that. So that way, we remove the subjectivity from it. And I know that there's 50 participants right now, and there were a lot fewer a few years ago. And there are, with one person who just graduated, 2 African-American people in that program, which is exactly the 4% of the population of Tompkins County, so it makes sense. So I totally agree. You have to remove your personal biases from the team, and then you can create a system that's consistent over and over again. I'm not on the felony treatment court. I don't know how much of a screening process there is there, and whether certain personalities on the team have influence. I suspect that the DAs offer treatment court, and again, some people may not want it, some people may want it. I don't know how frequent it is that people want it and are turned down at this point.
I have a concern, though, Joe, when you talk about we don't settle a case without a treatment court order. I have a concern about litigation by policy. Because everybody's an individual, and there might be some people for whom treatment court just won't work. And that's a person of color or a white person, and those, we have a policy and we stick to our policy. It troubles me. I don't know. I think that should be looked at, frankly, so we can serve the individual.
We discharge people if it's not working, and then they can take the traditional method with a caseworker without all the supervision, all the support.
But you're still putting them through trial, because it's a policy, and it's a policy designed with no one specific in mind and a goal in mind, and it is a noble goal, but it troubles me a little bit, and it troubles me as a defense attorney, and we've been through it a lot.
It's hard to predict.
Right.
So focusing on solutions, one idea I think we can all agree on is that a open process to treatment, this screening function really needs to be objective, and if you claim you have an addiction, alcohol, drugs,
treatment.
and want treatment,
Yes.
come on in. I mean, that would be something I think we all agree on. Is it on the board there? Okay, great.
I captured
Can I
it, too.
chime in with just some comments, in response to the disproportionate question
Yes.
that was asked from the
Yes,
audience?
Yes.
disproportionality
The
and what can be
disproportionality,
done.
yeah. So my perspective, again, comes mostly from family court. I do have quite a fair bit of criminal defense experience, but I usually represented younger kids who often really didn't face incarceration at that age. But my experience with kids who are placed in foster care and kids who are, again, placed in secure detention has been, I do notice a dismissiveness of the African American community in particular when people come forward wanting to be foster parents. And I do notice an extra level of scrutiny and a level of suspicion among the white caseworking staff that these people are unfit for certain reasons. And I'm not saying that every person of color is rejected as a foster parent, but I've had many cases where I felt that very strongly that a relative was appropriate, maybe not perfect, but was a relative, and yet was rejected for a lot of what I always consider to be excuses. And I think that really needs to be carefully reviewed and reconsidered. You know, we do know that people do best in the community, and we do have sub-communities, and you know, kids of color should be with the people they know, maybe people from their church or family members. And sometimes I think that there's just a bit too much dismissiveness. And this was not in Joe's tenure. It was about 12 years ago when I was the Family Treatment Court defense attorney, where a brother came forward wanting to take he was an adult brother wanting to take some kids when the mother died, and I was told that they suspected he was a drug dealer because of the car he drove. And, you know, that's not okay. And, you know, and that, we fought hard, and we went to trial, and, you know, and I had represented the mother, and then I represented the brother, and he raised those boys, and he did a good job. But you know, the suspicion that I was faced with was shocking to me, and you know, it was one of those eye-opening experiences that I say, coming from a person of white privilege, to actually hear people suspect somebody of drug dealing because of their race and their car.
Well, that's not systemic racism. That's just straight up racism.
Right.
It really was, and it exists. You know, it's there.
That's why, I mean, that's why the court system is always there over the social services system to make sure. I mean, the judge ultimately is making decisions about those permanency plans and placement resources, whether it's family or non-family. And I think the county court judges have done a good job of making sure that the county is and the local bar, you know, the defense bar that you're all part of and that I was part of for years too, make sure that you know, the institutions, whether it's the district attorney's office or the Department of Social Services, on their toes and doing the right thing. I mean,
Well, and let's add to that, because in addition to what you were saying with the Department of Social Services, there is that same dismissiveness within the probation department when they're dealing with the kids, and, you know, a non-white student who does something wrong would be viewed more harshly and treated more harshly and given less of a chance with some of the JDs I've had. And it's made a difference in that kid's life moving forward, that if he makes the mistake that, you know, the kid sitting next to him makes, and he's got a harsher punishment, he has to wonder why. And if the only difference, if they're the same age, they're at the same school, they've done basically the same thing, and the only difference is their skin color, what else is he to think? And that's happened far too often within the JD and PIN system too, that there is a dismissiveness as to whether they should get the same chance. And it is on the attorneys for the children to push for the equality, and it's hard. I mean, I know we've both faced that, and so it's within the department, it's also within probation, and we have to make sure that we're recognizing that moving forward.
I think what's being described is what Seth called subjectivity, is a sort of the big area that you're talking about now. And if the justice system's main idea is public safety, to realize that most of the lawyers, the judges, the DA, the whole system is white. There's a certain bias in the system of understanding what danger means, and what's appropriate means, and what reasonable means. And all of these words get defined in a certain way because the system is all white. And if we think about who makes the assessment of danger, who decides whether this brother is a danger to these younger kids, or whether he's actually a suitable person to raise them, who decides what dangerous means? That's the kind of subjectivity that's really built into the system, because most of the people are white and have not examined their backpacks to see what prejudices or stereotypes they're bringing into the system. So when decisions are made, they're made on the basis of this whole cultural system that's white. And different decisions would be made if different ideas of what dangerous were present, or there was a different kind of awareness. How can we get from where we are? We don't have a lot of time. How can we get from this sort of overly white consensus about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate or dangerous or safe, to have a deeper understanding of our own stereotypes and prejudices coming into these systems. Where could we begin?
You can start with systems that allow for all the subjectivity that you're talking about. So within the criminal justice system, something that was in the film and something that goes to the disparate effect of the negative effect of the criminal justice system upon African American people is just look at the jury system. And there was mentioned in one of the 3 films that people of color are more often excluded from juries than white people are. And you have a system where the attorneys are looking at people. You can ask questions. It's called voir dire, and you ask all sorts of questions. But what you hear on the television is on the jury are 3 black women and 4 white men, or whatever it is, and it always it becomes focused on that almost entirely, and that's because people have preconceived notions of how this person's going to decide a case, perhaps. And you could, and I always thought when I was a defense attorney that jury selection was, it's part science and social science, it's part like voodoo. You don't know what you're doing, and trying to figure it out. And you could have a system. I mean, this is just a practical thing, and maybe I don't know among trial attorneys how popular it would be, but you could go to the federal system where there is the parties aren't choosing the jury, where local federal system courts are, the judge is doing a very simple voir dire, every person gets the same questions. And so then you're not going to have this notion of like, the jury system is just utterly, racialized, I guess. I don't know what the right word is.
Statutory changes in
Right.
New York to do
And of course, I'm
that.
not saying a judge can do that. I'm just saying, for people in this room, if you're looking at kind of practical things within the criminal justice system, low-hanging fruit, you can change things like that, or you can just remove all of the objections that attorneys get. You can keep it limited to 2, and really, instead of having 100 people in the room and taking all day to choose a jury, have less people in there and say, 12 of these 20 people are going to be on your jury, let's go, and not have as much subjectivity and
But that's not in anyone's discretion locally.
Correct.
well, it's not in our discretion
No,
to
but
change the
we're talking
education
about
system
bigger
either.
systemic changes and what could we do locally to influence changes on a statutory level. That I think is relevant.
Wait, I don't.
3 people talking at once.
They wanted some cards.
Yeah. We'll say the same thing. Let's hear. Yeah, I've been trying to sneak them in, but there are so many good ideas here. And what I do want to promise you is that we will write these all up. We will make these available to people. We will take them into our conversations in the structural allies against, white allies against structural racism. And these ideas won't be lost. There's more than we can possibly address in the next 2.5 minutes.